Hi, I'm June, the Happy Thai girl. Visualize for a moment warm homemade breadsticks for your soups and stews. This week, I'm going to show you how easy, yes, easy, my recipe is. That's today on Cooking Made Easy with June, brought to you by Macy's, the happy shopping store in Spanish Fork. Hi, welcome to Cooking Made Easy with June. Today we are making homemade breadsticks. In reality, it is the same recipe as my bread recipe, so you can actually use this recipe to make bread. But I'll kind of mention it to you before next when I go into the process of doing the dough, of forming the dough. So bread is so easy. It is basically, I mean, come on, they've been doing it for centuries, right? Basically, you need flour. So I prefer the bread flour because I believe it has the gluten. I looked this up before, and it has extra gluten in it, so, or something in it that makes it, that adds to make it more like easily of a different texture. Now, honestly, when I first started making bread years ago, probably like 30 plus years ago, before I even got married, I just loved to do stuff like that. I actually just use regular flour. And so the regular flour, just, you know, white flour, and I would just knead it, and it still came out well. But once I discovered bread flour, it had a different texture, more fluffy, and of course I did not put my whole cup. I grabbed the half cup, so I don't want to spend forever measuring. So here's my 1 cup. So you start out with flour, and I have bread flour, so again, like I said, you can substitute with just regular flour. So we're going to start with about 12 cups of flour. And it's better if you start out less, if you think your cup, if you measure heavy, because you can always add, but you can take out the flour and it mixes it up. Oh my gosh, how many cups did I put on there? 1, 2, that's about 4 cups. Okay, 4, 5, 6-ish, 7, 8, 9, and 10. I'm going to start with 10 because, okay, I'm going to do 11. Because I think I measured a lot. So I think you just make about 11 cups, and you're going to need, for the full recipe, about 13 cups. So make a little well in there, and then turn on your tap water to pretty warm. And we're going to add 5 cups of really warm tap water. Now yeast, people are afraid to do yeast, I think, because they're like, what if it doesn't rise and you use all this? But I have been doing this for years. If you have really warm, like the warmest you can get, and then you kind of touch it and you can handle touching it, then it's good temperature. And honestly, by the time you measure and put it in there, it's going to cool down some. So you don't want the water to be too cold. I would rather a little bit on the warm side. Okay, so I measured that. So that's about another cup. So that's approximately 5 cups. Okay, so I have pretty warm water. So I'm putting my finger in it. It's warm, but it's not too hot to touch. So that's the perfect temperature. Or if you really want to be technical, you can get a thermometer and to look it up, see what temperature it is, because I've been doing this for years, of the temperature of the water. So you have that, and you add a cup of sugar or honey or whatever sweetener, or now one time I tried to do sugar-free. Oh no. You have to use at least some regular sugar, so it will help feed the yeast. So I have a cup of sugar, and I have 2 tablespoons of dry yeast. Now, this is just regular dry active yeast. There's instant yeast. I buy these by the bulk, and I store it in the jars, and I write the expiration date on it and put it in my fridge because I bake a lot. So I like the regular yeast. Now, if you buy the packets of yeast, like the little packets, that's about a tablespoon. So I measured it to make sure. All right, so you have that, and then you have 2 tablespoons of yeast, a cup of sugar, and then we have 2 tablespoons of salt. And then we have a half cup of oil. Now, I tried making breadsticks. My kids were like, find the copycat recipe for the Olive Garden bread recipe. And I actually just did it this week. And it was an all butter recipe. And I thought, oh, I'm going to love this. But honestly, I didn't, because I think it's not the butter, but it was because of the recipe only called for you to let it rise for just 1 hour, one rising. But I'll show you the difference between that and this one. Okay, so I put the yeast and everything in here, and I'm going to whisk it a little bit like that, just so the yeast will be in the water and let it kind of soak a little bit. So I'm gonna wait for just like 30 seconds maybe until you can see that the yeast is a little bit dissolved. And you can see the bubbles coming up, that it's activating it with the sugar and the water at the temperature of the water and then the yeast. So while it's doing that for a second, I'm going to talk a little bit about the yeast. So it is important. Some people, what they do is to test the yeast. So let's say you don't bake often, and then you say, oh, I have some yeast, but I don't know if it's still good, even though the expiration date is still okay. You're just not 100% sure. You can put a little bit in a cup of warm water and let it sit for about 2 or 3 minutes and see if it starts to bubble up. And if it starts to bubble up, then it's active. So that's how it goes. And so I think that's the scary part of a lot of people think, oh, I'm gonna make this whole batch of dough and then it's not gonna rise. That's always been my fear, and it's still to this day I think, oh, what if it doesn't rise? But and I've had situations where it hasn't risen because I didn't test my yeast. And I don't always test my yeast. But anyways, honestly, it's worth the step to make sure that you have active yeast. So that's enough about the yeast. Okay, so it looks like it's, if you see the little bubbles and it's the yeast is basically dissolved in it. So I like to start off by whisking the middle to get the flour. So I just go from the middle and I get a little bit of flour in there to get that mixed. And then you just keep going and adding. Sometimes I'm in a hurry and I'm not too particular about this step, but I mix it just enough to where I can see how smooth it is, but at the same time, I hate it when I stick too much and it gets sticky and it's hard to clean the whisk. So that's all I'm gonna do for that. And then I take a flat wooden spoon or any kind of spoon that's flat, and then we're just going to start stirring the flour into the wet mixture there. Okay, and you start from here and you gradually go in like that, okay? So you see how it's getting pulled in together like that? Now, I know we have a recipe, but there's so many factors involved in measurement. So it's hard to be exact when it comes to making bread to me. So because there's so many factors like temperature, if you measured, too much or whatever, but I think you have to just look at, watch this video again or look it up to where, how thick or how sticky you want the dough. So now some breads that are like whole wheat with oatmeal and things like that, the dough is going to look more dense and the bread is going to be more dense. But this is just white bread. So we want it to be a little kind of fluffy a little bit, more like a bread dough, like a roll dough. So as I stir, you notice how it's thick, but it's still sticky. So I'm just going to start using my hands now because it will be much easier. So I take that off, and I'm going to go ahead and start, like I would, see how I get flour on my hand, and I'm going to start kneading it right now. Like I said, we do not want it to be too dense. I've done that before where I put too much flour. It's much easier to add flour than to make it more wet, which you really can't. So honestly, I would go under the amount of bread flour that you put in. I'm gonna make this over here. Okay. So So as I get sticky, then I put a little bit here around the sticky part. And I'm going to take it out of the bowl in a minute so you guys can see a little bit better. So as I'm going in, I'm scraping with my hand the sticky dough part, okay? So I have it's enough to where I can handle it now. So I'm going to put a little bit of flour onto the countertop. And have you guys seen the movies? I love watching people knead bread. So here we go. So put a little bit on the counter so it won't stick to your counter. And then you just start from here and start kneading it like that, see? So you don't have too many stickiness. So kneading, you just have to watch and practice. So I kind of like grab it and push it with the back of my hand. And there's really no right way, but it just seems, see it's getting sticky there. So I'm like, okay, I noticed I'm gonna put a little flour there. So as we go along, it's going to get more formed and more smooth as a dough. So this recipe, you want to knead about 5 minutes, at least. Okay, so I mean, you really could have an activity with your family and they can help you knead. But honestly, this is like really relaxing to me, to be able to just sit here and knead. Well, like you could put on a show, or you can just listen to music, and it's kind of like a thoughtful thing for me. So when I want to clear my thoughts or something and I'm baking, I like to just knead and not think about much or think about whatever, clear my mind about what I want to think about. So, I mean, sometimes there's so much chaos. Now, some people say, well, why don't we use a bread machine? I'm old enough to show you, to tell you, I've gone through the era. Remember when there was like a bread machine where you had to measure the ingredients exactly right? You have to spoon in the flour and just spoon in everything and scrape it right. I don't know if you remember those days. And you put it in this bread machine and you turn it on and you have fresh bread. And it is good. But honestly, it has a different texture. It has a different texture, and it drives me nuts to have to spoon in the flour and get it started that way. I don't know what happened to those bread machines. I don't even know if they sell them anymore. But and then you have to use a certain kind of yeast and things like that. But I'm just going back to the old-fashioned way, to where I feel like, oh, and I need to work on my thoughts. I don't finish my sentences sometimes. So the old-fashioned way of where you don't need to use, some people will say, well, I have a bread machine where it kneads it for me. And I'm sure it does work too, but I prefer this, and you don't have as many things to wash and deal with. So I'm going to continue to see how it's getting sticky, and I'm going to just sprinkle it like that and pat it around. Okay, so that's what you do until it becomes pretty smooth and like a dough, like that. So, okay. All right, so now you see how I'm kneading. See how it's getting more smooth? So you might want to do this for about 5 minutes or so until you can see how it's getting really smooth. Well, that's not that smooth right there. So you put a little bit more flour. So what I'm going to do, I need a few more times. I'm going to take a little break. And when we come back, well, actually that's pretty good. So there are recipes where you spray it so it doesn't stick to the pan, but I just use the same bowl that I use it. I leave it on my counter, and you can, if you want to put it somewhere else and not on your counter, you can just put it in the bowl and cover it. But I'm just like, oh, there it is. So I'm going to cover it like this and let it rise. So when you come back, we're going to have risen dough to work with, so don't go away. Welcome back. So this is, a different dough, but it's the same thing, same concept, where it's rose. And look, it actually doubled in size. It actually gets pretty big. And this part, you let it rise for about 2.5 hours. I know, but it's worth a step. I've had some Europeans tell me, Americans are so impatient with their bread. It was this baker I met, and he was like, they don't let it rise enough. And I guess they let their bread rise like several risings, not just once or even twice. But anyway, so because we're making breadsticks, if you were making bread, you would let it rise for 2.5. Well, the dough would be 2.5 hours. But if you're making bread, you would form it into bread pans, and you would let it rise another hour and a half. But breadsticks take about 15 to 20 minutes to rise in the pan once you form it. So you just take the dough, and you're just going to make for the breadsticks, just little balls. And honestly, it doesn't have to be perfect. There was one time I was trying to and you can put a little flour to help you cut. I was trying to make perfect breadsticks, and it just takes forever. And I know that the Olive Garden, they have machines or something they have to make it look I've seen those pans where they have the little forming, what do you call it? Formations were already for you, where you just put in the dough and it forms it, like a hot dog bun maker or something like that. And I guess that would be good. And maybe Olive Garden or some of the other restaurants, professional restaurants, have those, something like that to make their breadsticks form, which would be a lot easier. But for this regard, at home, you can just do this. Now, honestly, this dough is awesome. I've heard people using roe dough or bread dough to make pizza crust, or to make, like I said, so bread. And I'm still looking. I tried making pretzels once, but I haven't figured out how to make that thick crustiness on outside. I think you bake it in some kind of a steamer or something. And anyways, so talking about a steamer, I'm looking at getting me an oven, and we were shopping the other day, and they have some ovens that actually have a steaming setting. Isn't that not so cool? Anyways, one day. Anyway, so I have I'm just gonna do a few for the pan. So I'm gonna just show you a few. You could do these. It seems easier to me to go ahead and cut the balls and make them into individual sticks, because I've tried making a big rope and then cut it, but it shrinks and it looks funny, and I don't know. But you could try it, but maybe you're more artistic than I am, because I honestly, this is not my forte, is the artistic part of cooking. I can present it pretty well, but to make it, that's why I don't purport to do something that looks too pretty. I'm just not patient for that. I do more practical usage, so I'm just going to do it like that and just roll it out. And if you have a little flour in your hand, it makes it a lot easier. So that one's kind of ugly. But honestly, to me, I think it's so whimsical to have various textures and various forms of breadsticks. So it just looks really good. We'll show you at the end once we bake it. Because once you bake it and it's nice and brown with butter on it, it's going to be so yummy. So if you want to place your sticks where they're far apart like this and they won't stick together, and some may, if you want to bake more than one at a time, more in one pan per time, you can do that, and they may stick together, but it'll still be fine. Okay, so just don't stress too much about it and have fun. And this is when your kids can help you to roll out the bread dough. Once you make these batches once and you taste them, you're never going to go back to buying your own breadsticks. This is so worth it. Okay, so I'm going to do just a couple more. I think maybe I can fit one or two more on this pan. Okay, so anyway, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You could probably put 10 or 12 in, depending on the size of your cookie sheet. So what you want to do is finish. I'll finish this in a minute, but I'm going to show you. So once you have your tray, you're going to brush a little bit of. The butter can even be softer than this. Almost melted. You can just actually put melted butter on this. But I had this melted and it was sitting here, so it got harder. So it doesn't matter. So you want to put some butter, and this helps it from not drying when it's rising. So what we want to do is, of course, use real butter. Use real butter. The only time I don't like real butter are the movie theater popcorn. They do put some butter, but that fake butter, I don't know what it is. It's just so good for the popcorn only, though. Okay. So I'm just going to put some butter on these. And then you just let it sit on, you know, wherever. In the winter, you could put it in your oven and not, it's a little bit warmer than your room. But you let it rise for about 15 to 20 minutes. And if you forget, it's okay, it'll still be really good. You say, oh, it's been 30 minutes. But anyway, so it'll just be more fluffy. But so you let it rise and then you then you stick it in the oven at 375 for about 12 to 15 minutes. So we're gonna take a break. I'm gonna stick these in the oven, and when we come back, we're gonna have hot breadsticks to share with you. All right, guys, welcome back. I had some bread dough left, and this is what I normally do. I would have that big batch of bread, and that one batch actually makes about 4 large loaves of white bread. But I made the breadsticks, and if you have dough left, you could store it. Today, what I'm going to do, you can make the rest breadsticks, and you can put the breadsticks in a bag and freeze the breadsticks and pull them out as needed, or you could make some breadsticks. And this is how I wanted to show you how I was going to put it in a bread pan. So you have about the size dough, and you want this part, you don't want to skip, because see how it's got like bubbles like that? Can you see that? And then you just kind of do it. It doesn't have to take long. See how I squeeze out the air pocket, the yeast? Can you hear that little squeak? And then you just roll it like this, kind of a firm rolling. And it doesn't have to be perfect. It all will turn out and look amazing. And so you just pinch in the edges, and then you kind of shape it a little bit to be about the size of your pan. And then you have this dough that you put it in. And then the second rising is 1.5 hours. So the first rising 2.5, and the second rising for bread. The breadsticks takes about 15 minutes, and if you want to, you can let it rise the breadstick a little bit longer. So that's that, let it rise. Just no covering it or anything, just letting it rise. Okay, so let me pull out the breadsticks from the oven. They just got finished. And I've got these, one day I'm gonna get some cute oven mitts. We'll grab these yellow ones. Okay, so, ooh, hot breadsticks, you guys. Oh, look at that, isn't that beautiful? Okay, I'm gonna put this over here. So, again, I already brushed it with butter and let it rise. So I'm going to add more butter. That's where the awesomeness is. Now, if you would like, at this point, you can sprinkle a little bit of salt and parsley. But if you want to make it like a Parmesan breadstick, before you bake it is when you would add some butter, brush it with butter, and sprinkle some Parmesan cheese. I've also made garlic breadsticks to where before you bake it works the best. If you brush it with butter like this before you bake it, and sprinkle some garlic, salt, and maybe a little parsley to make it look pretty. So, but here, these are just plain butter breadsticks that are going to be awesome. Now, I forgot to mention I did use salted butter for these. So I've got that one out of the camera here. I'm going to move. Actually, let's do this. Spatula. Go ahead and move these onto the rack. Now, sometimes people wonder, why do you want to cool things on a rack? If I have time, I like to cool it on a rack, because then it doesn't get the bottom wet. Like, you know how if you leave it in a pan, it gets the bottom wet as it cools. So that's why I cool my cookies, my breadsticks, or whatever, and on the rack. Okay, so I wanted to brush these while they're hot. The rest of these, don't want to waste them. We don't need to display them, but why not? We'll have lots of yummy breadsticks. Oh, you guys, this is the best. The best. Hot rolls, hot bread sticks, hot bread out of the oven is the best. So so we got that. So that whole batch, I basically used about half a cup of butter. Oops, so I'm gonna, still hot. Let's put the rest on here. Look at these. Some of these, see how even though they're different shapes and sizes, they're just lovely. I'm so excited. Okay, let's put this aside. okay? Okay, I'm gonna pull this out because I'm gonna put some more butter. Let's open up one. Oh gosh, I don't know which one. This one is so pretty. Okay, they're all awesome. So I'm going to break it open. Look at the texture. Oh, you guys, look at that. Look at that breadstick. I'm going to put more butter on it like that. So good. The butter, when you brush on it before you bake it, gives it a little crust, so it's really buttery. I'm just going to put this in a basket, and you just serve it hot. Woo. You can always use a tongue. So there you guys, how pretty is this? You don't have to go any fancy bakeries, you just have these beautiful breadsticks to serve for dinner. And like I said, you can put it in the long Ziploc bag and store them in there, stick it in the freezer or in the fridge. So, how easy is that? You guys have got to make these on your own. You could serve it with anything, especially when you make pastas and things like that. So, all right. Another wonderful episode of Cooking Ladies with June, not to brag. So happy cooking, happy baking. Until next time, come back to Cooking Ladies with June, brought to you by Macy's.